Will hydrogen ever power your city? For decades, it's been sold as the clean fuel of the future. And even in current administrations, with subsidies in the United States and the European Union that persist to the present day. But this really begs three questions. First, is it efficient enough to compete against batteries? Is it ever going to be cheap enough? And what's the design intent of hydrogen for cities? Well, not to worry. As a permaculture urbanist, I've got you covered. We'll dive deep into all three of these questions in this episode, and as a special bonus, we'll even delve into the hydrogen rainbow. Welcome to Edenicity, living cities for a living world. First up, is hydrogen efficient enough to power cities? It makes a certain intuitive sense. After all, hydrogen is the world's most energetic rocket fuel per kilogram, and it has certain obvious advantages. The chief among them is that it has no toxic emissions. When you burn hydrogen, you're just combining it with oxygen to get water. And this is potentially a really big deal since, as I showed in episode 90, car pollution is at least as deadly as car crashes are worldwide. And by dint of having no emissions, there have been some specialized applications for it over the years. It has certain advantages for indoor environments where you don't want to be breathing vehicle exhaust. Think warehouses, Costco, Home Depot, and Lowe's. Now today, most of those places use battery power, but 10 or 15 years ago, when batteries cost a lot more, it wasn't so obvious, and batteries also took a really long time to charge, and that would keep your equipment out of action for a while. So no toxic emissions does have real-world applications when you combine it with fast refueling. We're talking about refueling in 3 minutes versus half an hour. The other main advantage to hydrogen as a fuel is that it has no toxic feedstocks. You just use electricity and a catalyst to break up water into hydrogen and oxygen and just store the hydrogen. And storage is the key concept here. Hydrogen is energy storage. It doesn't compete with solar panels or windmills. You don't extract it like oil or coal. If you're making it out of water, you still need another energy source. Now, there is a bit of a footnote to that. You can make it cheaper out of fossil fuels, and we'll get into that with the hydrogen rainbow. Now, I know you're expecting a big disadvantage, and you will not be disappointed. The big disadvantage of hydrogen is its low efficiency, because that process of electrolyzing water costs you about 30% of the energy. Then you're going to lose another 10% when you compress, store, and transport it. Finally, to convert it back to electricity, you need to run it through a fuel cell, which is sort of like a battery that gives you electricity as long as you keep pumping fuel into it. Or if you just burn it in a heat engine with a turbine, and in both cases, you lose about 40% of the energy to heat. So when you combine all of these processes together, you're left with, charitably, an efficiency of 38%. Meanwhile, batteries are 95% efficient. So what this means is, with compressed hydrogen instead of battery storage, you need 2.5 times more solar panels to power the same city. But it gets worse. To move large volumes of hydrogen long distances, compression is not enough. You must liquefy it so it's compact enough to transport efficiently. That's what the space program did in the Apollo moon missions and the space shuttle. That great big orange tank on the outside of the shuttle, that's the liquid oxygen tank. The bottom 3/4 of it, roughly, is the hydrogen storage. Now, if you had to transport that hydrogen as a gas rather than a liquid, you would need a much, much bigger tank, 850 times bigger by volume. The nerdy rocket scientist term for this is its expansion ratio is 850. Now, in order to make liquid hydrogen, it's not enough just to compress the gas. You also have to cool it way, way down to about 20 degrees above absolute zero on the Kelvin scale that physicists use to describe these things. On this scale, room temperature is about 300 Kelvin. Yes, I know, my room temperature is a little warm for some, 27 Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But on the scale, you can see that room temperature is much, much higher than the temperature you need to keep hydrogen at to keep it liquid. Now, it is true that if you compress it enough, you can get away with a little bit higher temperatures, but 33 Kelvin is your absolute maximum. And practically speaking, you would be wise to keep it cooler. Now, the problem with hydrogen liquefaction is that it's going to nearly double the price of your production facility. And also, keeping liquid hydrogen liquid is no easy thing. You need to have really thick insulation and let a little bit of it boil off slowly to keep the rest of it cold. Now, it's true that if you are storing it on a ship, you can use that boil-off hydrogen to power the ship, but you're still going to lose 20 to 27% just for storage and transport at the end of the day. And of course, once you deliver it to your destination, you have to combust it from liquid or reconvert it to gas and pipe it out to wherever it's going. And again, managing these in a responsible way comes with some energy loss. So for liquid hydrogen, your total efficiency comes down to 24%, again, compared to batteries at 95%. So with liquid hydrogen, instead of battery storage, you need 4 times more solar panels to deliver the same amount of energy, which, is laughable. So much for power plants. What about vehicles? Well, this is by no means a new idea. There were hydrogen vehicles on the way pretty much my entire life, and I'm not young, I'm 61 years old. But for most of this time, hydrogen had a really wimpy competitor, and this was gasoline-powered cars, which even today have an average fuel economy of 26 miles per gallon. And hydrogen fuel cell cars easily beat that with an equivalent 67 miles per gallon, similar to the absolute top performance of hybrids these days. But the hydrogen figure only considers the fuel, producing it from solar power with electrolysis, compression, storage, and delivery, and no liquefaction costs another 37%. So that brings the hydrogen fuel economy down to 42 miles per gallon equivalent, still much better than gas, but still nowhere near as good as a modern battery electric car. Now, as an aside, people have made the argument that, well, wait a minute, no, that's just a long smokestack. You're still pulling the energy from the grid. But no, this fuel economy equivalent takes that into account already. Battery-powered electric cars are just vastly more efficient. The combustion engines of a gas car and even the fuel cells of a hydrogen vehicle are much less efficient than the batteries of an electric car. And I'm only looking at the batteries versus hydrogen because the motors and drivetrains would generally be similar between the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and the battery electric cars. So we're really only comparing the energy storage. So when we're looking at these comparisons, we're looking at all the conversions from solar cell to wheel well, or from oil well to wheel well in the case of a gas car. And you can see that battery electric cars are 3 times more efficient than hydrogen fuel cell cars. Now, just to give you a sense of how incredibly much energy we put into cars and how subsidized car fuels are, I thought I'd show you the average U.S. consumption of energy in kilowatt hours per person per month for gas-powered cars, hydrogen cars, and battery electric cars. You can see that per person, it's 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. If you look at your electric bill, imagine adding an extra 1,000 kilowatt hours per member of your household. So if you have like 4 people in your household, that'll be 4,000 kilowatt hours added to your electric bill every month. That would be a lot of money. Now, because this is Edenicity, let's expand our thinking about efficiency for cities and vehicles. What else is possible for clean energy and energy conservation in cities? Beyond energy storage and power plants, how about the shape of cities? In the United States, we generally have a very sprawling and car-dependent pattern of development. But what if instead people could live close to friends, family, and all of the places they want to go? Work, shopping, schools, healthcare, recreation. And what if everyone in the city could also live close to public transit that expands their horizons 100-fold? This is called transit-oriented development. Is it a theory? Sure, but it's also actually been built all over the world. You'll see transit-oriented development in Vienna, Copenhagen, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Tokyo, Osaka, Singapore, Bogota, Curitiba, and even parts of New York City and Paris. But the best studied among all of these cities is Hong Kong. This is a city that had its stressors in the past. Its population nearly tripled in 2 years in the mid-20th century. And they've chosen a very dense, high-rise development pattern with a heavy emphasis on public transit. In fact, 90% of trips in Hong Kong are by public transit. This means that in Hong Kong, there's 84% fewer cars per capita than in the United States. Now, you may think that Hong Kong has got to be just impossibly urban and artificial and concrete, but actually, they have maintained 74% of the space as green space. Now, I know there's been a meme floating around about Mouse Utopia gone bad, which basically just condemns all cities for being high density and just unworkable. But if that were the case, you would imagine that in a place that became that crowded that fast and continued to grow through the rest of the 20th century would not have very good medical statistics, but in fact it has enjoyed the longest life expectancy of any city in the world for many, many years. The nation of Japan may have just recently caught up with it, but it's right at the top of the lists. But what I like about Hong Kong is that it's not the perfect city from a transit-oriented development standpoint. It was specifically developed along those lines as a polycentric or constellation city, meaning that it has several different urban centers spread out generally in a ring around the new territories. And the original idea was that each of these new towns would be places where you could meet all of your needs through your entire life without having to travel to other parts of the city. So such trips would be very rare, and that would greatly reduce strain on the transit system. But in fact, it didn't work out quite as planned. Far more people than expected make the long commutes into the central financial districts, and this has obviously made the new towns not nearly as autonomous. Hong Kong is not even the perfect ideal case by any means in terms of making trips short in the city, reducing the number of trips people would need to take by motorized transit. It's just very good, but we can compare it with the United States. So in the U.S., the average American travels about 20,000 kilometers per year. And in Hong Kong, actually added up the total mileage on the mass transit railway, their bus system, minibuses, ferries, and so forth. And that came out to a grand total of almost 5,000 kilometers per year. But the energy intensity of these services, because these vehicles are shared, is much less than a U.S. gas-powered car, and less than half as much as fuel cell cars, just a little bit less than electric cars. But because of the design of the city, the total energy is much less than you would use in the U.S. with automotive transport, even if you were using an electric vehicle. So U.S. fuel cell cars still consume more than 15 times more energy than Hong Kong public transit. All of this is just to say urban design matters. Now, when I did the calculations for the Edenicity land use concept, which is available as a download in the description below, I came up with a number of 32 kilowatt hours per person per month, including long-distance intercity high-speed rail transit. And I'm not a transit planner, but somewhere in that range of 32 to 46 kilowatt hours per person is what's possible and what's reasonable for cities to aspire to in their ground transportation. Okay, so hydrogen is obviously way less efficient than battery electric, both in power plants and in vehicles. But can hydrogen compete on cost? Is it cheaper now? Will it get cheaper in the future? And what does the market actually expect today? So to get at these questions, I looked at the cost of hydrogen today, how much energy it stores, how much of that energy is realistically available after combustion. And then I compared that with published levelized cost of energy figures from Lazard, which is a 178-year-old analyst firm that has published comparisons of many different forms of energy and what they cost. Everything about this slide is unfair, but it does give you at least a sense of how out of touch hydrogen pricing is from everything else. What I'm showing here is green hydrogen, which is the clean option made from water. And we're just looking at the hydrogen gas. We're not looking at any of the infrastructure costs at all. I've compared this to Lazard's figures for battery storage alone, and this does include the facility, the land, the operations and maintenance, and eventual decommission of the batteries. So that really does include everything that's missing from the gas figure, and it's still lower. I've also included solar plus battery and wind plus battery, and this may seem crazy. I mean, why would solar and battery cost less than battery by itself? That just doesn't seem to make sense. Well, it's measuring a slightly different thing. The solar and battery and wind and battery prices measure single installations where you have both generation and storage on the same land. So you've basically just pulled one permit and you're building them together. So there's economies of scale. They used a formula where the battery was at a fixed 10% of your installation. It is hard to compare those numbers to the others, but I would love to see a comparison of a solar, wind, and battery installation, because in this case, there's real synergies between all three. The wind fills in for solar at night, and the battery fills in for both. But again, the point being that hydrogen gas alone just doesn't seem to make sense as part of the clean energy picture. It's just out of touch with the pricing. Now, it's totally reasonable to wonder whether hydrogen might get cheaper in the future, like solar and wind did. After all, industrial products like solar panels do get cheaper over time as we learn to build them more efficiently. That's why solar prices fell 99.8% since 1976. It's also why batteries got 93% cheaper since 2010. But hydrogen isn't like that. It requires a whole new infrastructure. It requires special handling because it's the leakiest gas on Earth. It makes pipes so brittle that MIT estimated that you can't mix more than 40% hydrogen into a natural gas pipe, that's a methane pipe, before it starts to make it brittle. And energy.gov says that number could be as little as 15%. As a supercold liquid, hydrogen makes metals brittle, and it has two kinds of explosion risk. First of all, when it changes phase from liquid to gas, you have that expansion ratio of 850, which is terrible enough, but it's also the hottest combusting gas on Earth. This means that hydrogen threatens your facilities with major losses of infrastructure and life if there's an accident. It's not just a matter of better manufacturing, it's also a matter of very diligent operations, maintenance, and probably insurance. Moreover, you can't use hydrogen as a replacement for gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel. In the case of airplanes, for example, the tanks, even for liquid hydrogen, get so big and so volatile that you have to redesign the whole airframe, so don't expect much of a learning curve for hydrogen. But just to be sure, let's look at some study results for hydrogen production. A learning curve answers the question, when production doubles, how much does price go down? In the case of solar panels, going back 50 years, that number is 20%. Every time production doubles, you get solar panels that cost 20% less. In the case of hydrogen, this study found that the total supply chain of hydrogen had a flat learning curve. They did find that in the case of water electrolysis, the learning curve could be almost as good as solar, 18%, but the error bars were just huge. They were plus or minus 13%, so it's really hard to judge. But in fact, since 2022, according to Green Fuel Journal, electrolyzers went up in price by 57%. And retail hydrogen costs have always been high and are going up. According to a cost analysis by Stillwater Associates in 2025, the cost of hydrogen fuel in cars per mile has been going up steadily and is now 4 times higher than gasoline. And in general, the retail price forecasts were flat to down, but real prices kept going up. We're still, according to Lazard from 2021, when you mix hydrogen in with natural gas or methane, even at just a paltry 20% concentration, the levelized cost of energy doubled. And when you use blue hydrogen, which is made from methane gas, not water, but they try and sequester the carbon dioxide, the 20% mix still cost 50% more than just using gas alone. Well, the market noticed all of these trends, and according to Chemistry World, developers canceled 4.9 million tons a year of production capacity, which is 5 times more than reached construction last year. Also in 25, BP walked away from 2 projects. And according to ESG News, less than a fifth of the companies that promised hydrogen production by 2030 have found a buyer yet. So can hydrogen compete on cost? It's not cheaper now, it's not getting cheaper, and buyers and producers are walking away. All I gotta say is, ouch. So, given that it's not as efficient as batteries and it doesn't compete on costs, what's the design intent of hydrogen as a fuel for cities? Because this is a question we're facing here in Hawaii, and this may be kind of a pilot project for other cities as well. Hydrogen, it's sold as clean energy to the point where it was subsidized in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Just last month, Hawaii's Governor Josh Green, who's long been an advocate for clean energy, said that our fully renewable future includes hydrogen gas, and he's not alone. In 2022, I attended Reuters' Energy Transition Asia-Pacific Conference, where civic leaders and energy CEOs from all over Asia were gushing about the many colors of hydrogen. I was actually so impressed with these CEOs. They were some of the most passionate, warm people I've ever seen. They just exuded a sense of responsibility and caring and thoughtfulness. But slowly, as they started to discuss many different colors of hydrogen that they felt were integral to their transition, I began to have just kind of a sick feeling in my stomach. So let's walk through the hydrogen rainbow. Green hydrogen is what we've been talking about so far. This is water plus excess solar energy. Yellow hydrogen would be water plus dedicated solar energy. Black hydrogen can actually be made from coal, and as you can imagine, this is super toxic. Same for brown hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is made from methane or natural gas with no carbon sequestration. So basically, methane is CH4. You knock all those H's off, you're left with the C. It quickly combines with oxygen, and now you've got to do something with that CO2. Gray hydrogen, they just say, nah, let it ride. So that's not so good. Blue hydrogen is made from methane, but in this case, you take that CO2 and somehow sequester it, maybe bury it underground. Turquoise hydrogen involves pyrolysis, where you make solid carbon instead of letting it convert into CO2, and that takes extra energy. Pink hydrogen is water plus nuclear energy, so you still need to find some uranium. And finally, white hydrogen is a fracking byproduct, which, to my knowledge, has never been commercially captured and used for hydrogen production. Now, when you look at this list, it's pretty obvious that all but the green and yellow maintain the fossil or nuclear infrastructure and supply chains. This is not an accident. The idea in nearly all of these cases is that we can build hydrogen-ready gas power plants and until the world is economically producing enough hydrogen, the CEOs wanted us to use bridge fuels like liquid natural gas that they sell as less bad for us than oil and coal. But as I've pointed out in other episodes, methane is 80 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, so there's serious concerns about leaks and handling. And producing hydrogen from it, of course, either costs you extra energy and raises the price, or you're just dumping more carbon into the atmosphere. Now, the bridge fuel argument does have a little bit of plausibility. Liquid methane is pretty cold, 111 Kelvin, compared to 300 Kelvin for room temperature. But methane already costs more than solar, wind, and batteries. Its prices are volatile and not decreasing like solar and wind. With any fossil fuel, including liquid natural gas, you have to keep buying more, which leaves you 300 times more dependent on foreign suppliers. When you're out of gas, you need gas today. Compare that to solar or wind equipment, where when it starts reaching the end of its life, you've got several years to make the replacement. So what's going on with this hydrogen rainbow? It's all about selling us bridge fuels, which basically means liquid natural gas or worse. And that's all about squeezing a few more decades out of mines and power plants that the world's energy industry is already starting to abandon. The word for those mines and power plants is stranded assets. So, will hydrogen ever power your city? Absolutely not. Is it efficient enough? No, you lose most of the energy before hydrogen does any work at all. So you need up to 4 times as many solar panels as if you just used batteries. Will it ever be cheap enough? No. Hydrogen costs more than batteries already. Its prices are rising, while clean energy prices, including battery storage, keeps getting cheaper. Suppliers aren't even finding buyers for hydrogen, and they're canceling projects faster than they're building them. So what's hydrogen really for? I mean, besides forklifts and industrial chemistry, which is legit, but really off the table when it comes to cities. As far as cities are concerned, the purpose of hydrogen can only be to save stranded, dirty energy assets and the profits that they bring. Now, I know this is a design show, and that was pretty political, but the very first observation of design that I made way back in episode 5 is that it embodies intent. So let me just state this clearly. The design intent of liquid natural gas as a bridge fuel to hydrogen is to lock us into fossil fuels for a few more decades. It's a deliberate lie intended to cheat the many so the few can get richer, and that is incompatible with livable cities and a livable world. If you want to see the Edenicity land use concept or read more about Hong Kong, you can read all about them in our publications in the description below. Here's one of those episodes I was talking about. Thanks as always to the wonderful patrons for supporting this channel. Take care, stay green, see you next time.